Okay, so get this right. 4,500 tips. 4,500. That's how many people contacted the FBI about Brett Kavanaugh when he was nominated to the Supreme Court.
Wow.
And guess where those tips landed?
I have a bad feeling about this.
Right, with the White House. The same White House that nominated him.
It's like asking the fox to guard the henhouse.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is all about, really. We're looking into those allegations against Justice Kavanaugh, but with a specific focus on the FBI and how they dealt with all these misconduct claims. Or, to be honest, how they didn't deal with them.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing just seems so shady. You've got thousands of people raising concerns about a Supreme Court nominee, and those concerns are just disappearing into a black hole.
It's more than a little suspicious, right? And that's where our sources for this deep dive come in. Glenn Kirschner, he's a former federal prosecutor, and Brian Tyler Cohen, a legal analyst. They break down this whole situation, and they do not hold back.
So let's talk details. What exactly happened with the FBI and Kavanaugh? I remember the whole thing being incredibly controversial.
Right, so to really understand this, we need to go back to 2018. Kavanaugh's confirmation hearings. Professor Christine Blasey Ford comes forward with those sexual misconduct allegations against him.
Right. Those were incredibly serious accusations. And that's why the FBI was brought in to investigate.
You would think with a case this big, this public, the FBI would be bending over backwards to be thorough, to investigate every single lead.
It's the FBI. You'd expect nothing less.
Exactly. But that is not what happened.
Okay, so what did happen? What's Kirschner saying?
Well, according to Kirschner, the FBI actually just buried those tips, thousands of them, just ignored, never investigated.
Hold on, wait. How can they do that? I mean, isn't the FBI supposed to be this independent investigative body?
See, that's the thing. They're not always as independent as we might think, especially when it comes to background checks like this.
What do you mean?
So when the FBI does a background check, they're technically working for whoever requested that background check. And in this case, that was the Trump White House.
So the FBI is working for the very same people who nominated Kavanaugh in the first place. That seems like a conflict of interest.
That's putting it mildly. The way Kirschner explains it is the FBI is kind of like, imagine you're buying a house.
Okay.
And you hire a home inspector to check it out, right? The inspector's job is to tell you if there are any problems, but ultimately you decide whether or not to buy the house.
So the White House is the buyer in this scenario, and the FBI is their home inspector.
Precisely. They're gathering information for their client, but it's ultimately up to the client, the White House, what to do with that information.
And in this case, the client allegedly chose to sweep a whole lot of potentially damaging information under the rug.
That's Kirschner's argument, and he doesn't mince words. He calls it highly irregular, and even hints at something more corrupt.
He thinks Trump might have used this information as leverage.
It's definitely implied. Like, did Trump pressure Kavanaugh, maybe with the threat of those tips getting out, to rule a certain way on cases that might affect him personally?
That's a scary thought. Using the FBI as a political weapon.
Exactly. And it gets even scarier because this might be part of a much larger strategy.
Okay, now you've got to tell me more. What larger strategy?
Well, Cohen links all of this to something called Project 2025.
Project 2025?
Yeah.
What is that? Project 2025, huh? That sounds ominous. What is it? Some kind of secret plan?
Well, secret might be pushing it, but it's definitely raising eyebrows. Basically, it's this, alleged blueprint for a second Trump term.
Okay, Ann.
And it seems to be all about the executive branch grabbing more power, specifically over federal agencies like, the Department of Justice, the FBI.
So you're saying this whole Kavanaugh thing, the FBI burying those tips, it might have been a test run to see how much they could get away with.
That's the concern Kirschner and Cohen are raising.
And what are they saying about what a second Trump term would look like if this Project 2025 is anything to go by?
Well, they paint a pretty intense picture. They're talking about a world where the DOJ and the FBI are basically just tools for the White House, used to silence anyone who disagrees with them and reward their allies.
That's really disturbing to think of it. It's like something out of a dystopian novel. We depend on those institutions, to be fair, impartial. They're supposed to be the guardians of the law, not a political party.
I know, right? And it's even more concerning because this whole Project 2025 thing, even if it's just an idea at this point, it's part of this larger trend we're seeing everywhere.
What do you mean?
Like democracy's backsliding. Those norms and safeguards that are supposed to prevent abuses of power, they're eroding.
You're right. It feels like we're at this tipping point. And the scariest part is most people don't even see it happening.
That's why I think it's so important that we're having this discussion. We can't just sit back and let this happen.
So what do we do? Kirschner and Cohen, do they offer any solutions?
They do, actually. And it might seem kind of obvious, but they're really emphasizing the importance of voting.
Voting? Huh. It just seems so small, Like, how can one vote really make a difference against all of this?
Well, for one thing, they specifically call out early voting.
Early voting. Why early voting specifically?
Because it makes it harder to manipulate the outcome.
I see what you're saying. It's like, if a good chunk of the votes are already in, it doesn't matter what kind of shenanigans they try to pull on Election Day.
Exactly. It's like a preemptive strike against all the voter suppression tactics and intimidation that often happens.
Right, like trying to make it harder for people in certain neighborhoods to vote or spreading misinformation about polling places.
Exactly. Early voting helps to neutralize some of those tactics.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about it like that. So early voting, check. What else do they suggest?
Well, they also emphasize just how crucial it is to be vocal, to talk to your friends and family about these issues.
So it's not just about voting, it's about getting everyone engaged.
Yeah, making it a conversation, spreading awareness, basically. Because the more people are aware of what's going on, the harder it is to pull the wool over their eyes.
Knowledge is power. Or at least it's the first step towards feeling empowered to actually do something.
It's crazy, right? We started out talking about Brett Kavanaugh and the FBI, and now we're talking about the future of democracy itself.
It's all connected, though, isn't it? This whole Kavanaugh situation, those buried tips, Project 2025.
Yeah.
It all points to this bigger issue of power and how it's used.
And what happens when those in power feel like they can act without any accountability?
Exactly. Which is why I think it's so important that Kirschner and Cohen didn't just leave us with this terrifying picture of what could happen. They actually offered a way to fight back.
By voting.
Yeah, like you said earlier, it might seem kind of simplistic, but it really is the foundation of everything.
If we want to protect our democracy, we have to participate in it.
And encourage everyone we know to do the same. Talk to your friends, your family, your neighbors, anyone who will listen. Make sure they're registered to vote, that they understand the issues, and that they know how important their vote really is.
Because it's not just about one election, is it? It's about safeguarding those democratic values and processes for the long haul.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We can't take our democracy for granted. It requires constant vigilance, constant engagement from all of us.
Well said. So, to wrap things up, I think the big takeaway from this deep dive, the question that will really stay with me, is this. How much power is too much? Where do we draw the line when it comes to the executive branch and their influence over institutions that are supposed to be independent?
It's a question we all need to be asking ourselves. And more importantly, it's a question we need to be demanding answers to from our elected officials. We can't let this go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have to hold those in power accountable. So to everyone listening, stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, get out there and vote. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.